of federal rent control is coming to your town. And I wanted to bring this up as an important topic because this is something that we never talk about, meaning we as landlords, I mean, if I include everybody from Mastery, which is about 1,200 or so people in the Chicagoland area, and obviously now we're spread out to Florida. This is a very, very, very important topic. And for us as investors, as in Chicago, it's called a housing provider. Landlord is not the appropriate name anymore. But as housing providers, basically, they're talking about federal rent control. And this was something that Biden administration, some of the people, a little bit on the left side leaning things, bringing to the forefront, and this is something that we all need to be paying attention to. And my attitude of all people has been always that, okay, well, it doesn't affect me, I don't care, right? Which is the wrong attitude to have, hence we're talking about today. So I thought I'd bring that up. So this is a really important topic, and if we want to, be landlords, if we want laws, if we want things passed that are favorable to us, then we have to be politically active. We have to be politically connected. And this goes for me. So I'm not basically saying just for you, but we as in we, all of us as a group is what I'm talking about. So I used to think, I was like, well, maybe, we just build another big portfolio in Florida. Who cares anyways, because we have a lot of properties. And yet, as they suddenly start talking about federal rent control, this becomes an issue. So before I get into that particular thing, and I'm not saying on either side of it, left or right side of it, I'm just looking at it from regardless on a bigger end of it. I mean, basically, federal rent control is meant to obviously help people who economically are disparaged in a lot of ways, right? That's the intent. But like a lot of federal things, whenever you try to have a federal government control something or a state government control something, market forces are not going to come into play. But before we get into that, there's an important thing that came up today, and that was if you are investing in the Hazel Crest area, Hazel Crest has, for the next 6 months, put a moratorium on any more rental. Hazel Crest has been one of the big areas where a lot of investors have bought properties. So as of Wednesday, Miss Gina Diaz, Diaz Case Law Office just called today saying that Hazel Crest has put a moratorium on rental properties in Hazel Crest. So if you are buying properties over there, you may want to pay attention to. If you're in the middle of buying a property, and even if your attorney approval has expired, you may want to tell the attorney that, hey, guess what? But the terms have changed. This was just enacted literally this week. So hence, we're trying to make everybody aware of it. If you're from Mastery, you're already aware of it, that Hazel Crest has stopped that. So I know a few of the folks at Mastery are already canceling their contracts or renegotiating it at a lower price. I was just talking to somebody from Mastery. They had a contract that they had on a property for $116,000. The seller has agreed to drop the price down to 116 to 102. Right, that's a pretty good price drop. And I don't know what they're going to do with it, but at least the seller is willing to drop the price. So having said that, let's talk about federal rent control. When we talk about federal rent control, what is rent control? Right, number one, rent control is a government program that places some sort of a limit on landlords or housing providers, whatever you want to call it, for leasing and or renewals on leases. Now, there's many different types of federal rent control. It's not just a singular one. In some places, it's going to be that if you have an existing tenant, you can't raise the rent on them more than 3% of what the rent is when they went in. So in certain places like New York, you have a phenomenal location where somebody's been living there and abusing the whole rental situation for the last 20 years. Now, I would like to say that I am very well versed on it. I am not very well versed on it. We're going to bring a couple of people to one of these lives in the next week, because this is an issue that clearly is there's murmurings of it. Nobody's saying that it's going to pass, not pass. But anytime these kind of things are proposed, the intent is very good, but who knows what the outcome is going to be. Now, that does not mean that you have to think about it rationally. That does not mean if you have properties in good locations that suddenly, oh my God, I can only rent my property for $1,000. That's not what that means. But certainly it can or may have an effect. So rent control laws are usually enacted by municipalities, and the details will widely vary. All of these are intended to keep the cost of living and affordability down for lower income families. So obviously rent control is not put in place for somebody who's making $150,000, right? It's obviously meant for people that have lower affordability in general, right? Rent control in general right now, as we speak, is not widespread in terms of United States. According to a 2019 study, 182 municipalities in the United States have some form, municipalities, right, have some form of rent control regulations. All of them are in New York, New Jersey, California, Maryland, Washington, and Washington, D.C., right? So all of them are basically within those states. So New York, New Jersey, California, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. Well, these are the typical culprits in terms of having very leftist type of laws. So that's kind of what it is. I obviously, at least fiscally, I tend to be very conservative. Otherwise, I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm not quite wacky on the right or wacky on the left. I'm kind of in the middle to the most extent, but definitely by today's standards, I would be 100% a fiscal conservative in terms of economics, in terms of how I think things should be run. In fact, 31 states around the United States preempt or forbid local governments from enacting rent control measures as of February of 2022. So what does that mean? So even in Illinois, there is basically the local government cannot put rent control in. This was a bill a couple of years ago that was being talked about in Illinois, not to put rent control in place, but at least not to make it illegal in Illinois. But now, if a federal thing gets passed, now obviously federal will take precedence over the states. I'm sure there'll be lawsuits. I'm sure there'll be all kinds of things because the states will not want to listen to the federal mandate. But again, who knows the politics of it and how the Supreme Court comes down on it. That's a whole different issue. But these are things we should think about and we should be aware of. The issue of rent control has been revived over the last few years, particularly is in cities and states where there's the cost of living is spiraling out of control, right? Obviously, Chicago is going to be one of those places, not the place, but one of those places. New York, New Jersey, California, DC, those obviously are going to be the leading states. But right behind that, you have Illinois. So that's something to think about. And if it's a federal mandate that comes down, then obviously it affects, doesn't matter if you're in Florida, doesn't matter what state you're in, it's going to be a big issue. Now, this is going to be a big political issue. I have not heard anything yet from the realtor lobby, because that is a big, powerful lobby, but I have not talked to them. That is something that I mean to engage with them, because there is representation, obviously, in the local, meaning on the state level as well as federal level. But I haven't heard any statements yet. So the pros, basically, people who are for rent control, they will say, well, the housing will become more affordable, right? That's going to be one of their basic debates, is that if you have rent control, housing becomes more available. People who are economically basically disadvantaged for whatever reason, they will have more money to spend on other things, meaning their quality of life will get better if there is rent control. So these are people who are pro. Some other people say, well, there's going to be more social stability, right? Like a couple of years ago, we saw in Illinois, especially in Chicago, Cook County, certain rules went into effect, which is in Cook County, you cannot ask as to what is the source of income for somebody, meaning if somebody has a voucher, a housing voucher, you cannot deny them housing based on them having a voucher. They have to be treated equally. Now, that doesn't mean if you have a rule where you basically only provide housing for 2 years or more, meaning your leases are 2 years or more, anybody that is on the housing voucher program is not going to be able to sign a 2-year lease, right? That's just not going to happen. Like on my properties, I want a 2-year lease minimum, right? That's just the rule. So there's no, and it's equally implemented on everybody. But the reason for that was that basically, obviously, Section 8 tenants, I keep calling Section 8, but housing voucher tenants were having a hard time finding housing. And a lot of it is because it's just so hard to deal with this housing situation. I have a property right now, happens to be in Chicago, close to Midway area, and in the actually Evergreen Park area, but it's right in Chicago. And we've had 2 or 3 people that I felt were good tenants and would be because we were renting in the middle of winter. So we're having a hard time finding a 2-year tenant in that area, at least with the rents that I want, right? I want very high rents in that particular pocket because that's a really good pocket and the property is very nice. So the only tenants we could find were people with Section 8, which I said to Ms. Sandra, that's fine, but we have certain criteria that have to be met for everybody across the board, equally for all tenants. And over there, the challenge is every time somebody puts an application in, now you have to schedule with Section 8 to come and do an inspection on your property, and that process can be rather long. For that time, now your property is off the market. We already had one tenant we waited for, finally realized that she had fabricated her application. Then now we have another one who's possibly, Section 8 hasn't obviously yet put a date for when they're going to come and do inspection, even though one inspection was done already, right? So there are challenges with that. There are some good parts to Section 8, which is in certain parts of town, you get good rent. They're paying very high rents. Even sometimes it's even above what you can collect from market tenants in certain parts of town. So some people really love that. To me, I really don't care where the rent is coming from, as long as you respect my property, treat it nicely, and we'll treat you respectfully as our tenant. We've had some wonderful Section 8 tenants that were with us for 6, 7, 8 years. So it's not that every tenant is good or bad. It's people you're dealing with. My point being is that, again, that is a state, federal, whatever program that is, but that has its own goods and bads. The other part of it is going to be is that people who are older, a lot of people who are older have an issue in terms of their retirement income. They don't have a lot besides Social Security. So this is going to help those people also. This is what the people who are for rent control will say. This is especially important for people in low income. We already talked about that. The next thing is that what the people who are for rent control, this is their argument, this is not my argument, they say, well, tenants may take better care of your property, right? I guess the argument goes, according to them, that, well, you're providing a lower rent, right? And because of that, people are going to take better care of your property. That's not how it works, right? If you've owned a lot of properties, generally, the more the people pay, the more they take care of your property. That's just a fact, right? You own properties in areas that are economically depressed, your property is probably, even though it may be in good condition, those tenants are going to take more toll on the property. That's just what it is, right? As a given rule, sometimes with housing by provider, we have had wonderful tenants, exceptionally clean, no issue. But they're going to be more abusive because the money is not coming out of their pocket. That's why they take it for granted. It's not that if it was their money on the line, they would behave differently. But because it's not their money on the line, especially if they're not paying anything. Some of these tenants have $2,200, $2,300, $2,400, $2,600 in rent that housing voucher provides, depending on which area you're in. and the tenant's portion is $200, $300, $400. But obviously, it's because they may have children, they may have circumstances, whatever the case may be. But again, when somebody's paying out of their pocket, they know if they spill something on the carpet, if they damage so there is a repercussion. Unfortunately, sometimes whenever basically it's on the government's dime, a lot of times people don't give a damn about the repercussions. So again, doesn't apply to everybody, but these things do exist, happen more as economically you come down on the rent ladder. So there, I do not agree with the point that they make, which is tenants may take better care of the property. Now, the next point they say, tenants may stay in a property for longer term. Of course, right? You have below market rents, and your actual rent, market rent is $2,300, and you're renting the property for $1,600. You've been there for the last 10 or 15 years. And the landlord cannot raise the rent on you. Of course, they're going to stay in the property. That's the whole point, because they're going to abuse that situation, because if the next tenant comes in, now you can bring it up to normal market rents. And again, today, as I'm talking, I'm reacting to the news today. I'm not talking from a place today of necessarily really knowing the ins and outs. And again, because in every area, the rent control is done differently. So that's kind of what it is in the states that it does exist, which is New York, New Jersey, DC, out in California, those kind of places. So how about on the con end of things, right? Which is like, what are the cons of this? Of course, that's going to be people who are going to fall in my category, right? When you have a lot of properties that you own, and you own good quality properties in good quality areas, then of course I don't want rent control, right? Why would I want, if the taxes keep going up, like in the last 2 or 3 years, what have we seen? We've seen, they say officially inflation was at 8 or 9%. Now, if you take anything, building supplies into account, if you take grocery store bills into account, if you take the normal things, you and I, all of us have to spend, doesn't matter how much money a wealthy person has or a economically challenged person has, there are some basic expenses we all have, right? Food, shelter, water, but basic things. I mean, inflation to me was close to 10, 11, 12% for the last couple of years. So what does that mean? What that means is your dollar is basically doesn't go as far. So everything incrementally goes up. That means your taxes are going to go up, your utilities are going to go up, your anything where gas is used is going to go up. So every single thing incrementally goes up. And then how are you not supposed to raise rents? Because if I have a property that I own and my tax bill each year keeps going up, yet artificially they're not going to let me raise the rent in relation to that, that means they basically don't want me in the housing sector. Right? They want to drive me out of the housing market. That's what they're doing. Or what's going to happen is that more and more and more properties are going to get concentrated in the hands of bigger and bigger and bigger companies. Like for somebody like me, like I can handle making a little bit less cash flow on some properties. So I'm just going to say it's okay. It's no big deal, because I know a lot of landlords are going to get disenfranchised, and they're going to have to sell to people like me that at this point I have scale on my side. But yet for all the small landlords, see, most landlords in the United States, 95% of all landlords in the United States, in fact, actually the number is 98% of all landlords in the United States are mom and pop operators. What's a mom and pop operator? Mom and pop operator means they generally will have 1, 2, or 3 properties. One property is going to be a personal residence they live in. Another property may be a property that they had bought as their first home, and then they upgraded to a next home, a little bit bigger home, and they've rented out another property. Or they may have another property. A lot of landlords live on the income that comes from these rental properties. So this is a way of, some people have stocks, some people have some properties that they have, and the income is what supports them. So if you put a artificial barrier as to where they can raise their rents to, and all of your rest of your costs keep escalating, like what we saw happened in Chicago last year, where if you have a 2-unit building, 3-unit building, if you generally the taxes used to be less, especially if it's commercial building. Right? In Cook County, where there's residential attached to it, your taxes have almost doubled. right? 2.5 times they've gone up in the city where it used to be lower taxes. Now, what do you do? So this is a interesting debate because people who don't own real estate or who are renters for life, they're going to say, well, you're a rich guy anyways. See, most landlords are not rich people. Most landlords are people who have worked their butt off for 20, 30, 40 years, and that house, that property that they may own, is a part of their retirement. And all these years they've been making a mortgage payment 15, 20, 30 years to finally, hopefully someday have properties paid off, right? Relative to the whole population, they are not big landlords. But what is a bigger landlord? A big landlord is somebody who has a minimum of 100 properties or more, right? 98% of people are people who have one or two properties. That's it. So you're going to hurt those people. And bigger landlords like us are going to come in and we're going to have more properties to buy. So the average person you're going to hurt, and guess what it does? It's going to basically, landlords are not, so what the concept it is that this only may be applicable to certain areas. So meaning if you have properties in B zip codes or in A zip codes, this sort of a thinking is not going to apply because it's an affluent area to begin with. I have a lot of properties in A areas, right? In those areas, you're not going to have your rents at 1,500, 1,600 numbers. Your rent are very high and there's affordability in that area. So generally, this type of rent control sort of situation is going to discourage against the exact people these people are trying to protect, and which is areas where you have people that are economically challenged. And if I have properties, I don't, but if I have properties in economically challenged areas where I know rent control is coming, what am I going to do? I'm going to get rid of those properties because I don't want other people dictating to me what I can do and what I cannot do, because if I can't meet my expenses, then if I'm a small landlord, what am I going to do? I can't afford to come out of money out of pocket. I'm going to be forced to sell those properties to other people that are going to do a fix and flip in it, and it's not going to go to a landlord's hands. So there's going to be less housing because you're artificially keeping the prices down. Then there's no incentive. The reason in a capitalist society things work is because there is an incentive that if you invest, it's going to be better for you. Now, the next part of it is what they say is, well, rent control will lead to poor maintenance of buildings. That's already been seen, right? Areas that have the harshest rules for rent control, then what is the incentive for the landlord, or where does the landlord bring money from to be able to fix that building? Right? Let's just say they have a pipe where they need the sewer pipe going out of the property gets busted, right? Insurance company is only going to cover so much of it if people have insurance for that particular item. A lot of people are not going to. In fact, 95% of people are not going to have insurance. So now, where does the landlord come up with money? Because for most landlords, it's not like they're fat cats. Right? I did not start out at that place. It's taken time, last 10 or 12 years, to be able to build something that is of size. Still, if I have 200-300 properties where you have below market rents and I'm taking a loss on every single one of them, why would I ever keep those properties? I'll say I have a lot of equity. I'm just going to sell it, take my profits. So again, it goes back to hurting the people that we're most trying to help here. The next part of it is less homes are going to be for rent, of course. Right? If you're not going to let people make some money in their deals, right? The average landlord, if you look at the average landlord across the country, they make maybe $40, $50, $60, $100 per door, right? Per single family I'm talking about. Obviously, in multifamily is much lower, but in single families, the numbers we look at, which is $450, $500 per door without having any money out of pocket, those are not the numbers most people buy properties based on. They don't know where to find those types of properties. So this is something important to pay attention to. The next thing is that it's going to discourage investors from investing in areas where there's the most need, right? If we look at, say, Chicago as a geographic area, right, there are parts of town where there is a desperate need of good quality housing, safe housing for people to live in. But if those are the areas where economically people are the most severely affected, and then you're not going to let investors make some money over there because you're basically keeping the rent under control. The rest are going to say, hey, listen, I'm out. Right? I'm not going to deal with all these headaches. So in general, nobody is going to go and on purpose invest in those areas, right? So your availability of housing is going to go further down. That's just what it is. The next thing is that may lead to further shortage of housing, which is obviously tied to the point just before it. The next part is market forces can no longer work properly that they need to, right? See, market forces is supply and demand. If the demand is very high then, and the supply is not there, then obviously the prices rise. Now we're seeing that in the real estate market that the demand has softened. Automatically prices come down. And a lot of this is based on clearly that the rents have been obscenely high, right? No question about it. Any landlord that's worth their salt, everybody knows that the rents have been obscenely high. We all agree to it. But yet, when you keep pumping money in, keep pumping money in, keep pumping money in, you keep doing stimulus after stimulus after stimulus and keep giving people loans that abuse them and go buy Lamborghinis with them and go do nonsense stuff with them, then what do you think is going to happen? What do you think has happened since 2008? Before 2008, the average investor did not own that many properties. Right? This phenomenon of buying rental properties and accumulating that in big numbers, in huge numbers, has started somewhere around 2011, around the country. Today, investors own more properties. Now, it's a fraction of the actual homeowners, obviously, but still, in terms of the numbers, right, they're 5-6 folds. Last year, if we look at most markets, if you take an Atlanta market, you take an Austin market, you take a market like Tampa, a lot of parts of Florida, Fort Myers, that whole market, a lot of parts. Nashville is another example of that. Phoenix, Vegas. In all of these markets, 25 to 28%, excuse me, of all trackable sales were investors in the market. Why? Because the idea of owning real estate has changed for the younger generation today. So people who are going to be, say, 15, 20 years younger than me, they're in their 20s, they're in their 30s, right? They are not thinking about necessarily saving 20%. That generation is a lot more about experiences. They want to go out. They want to travel the world. They want to do other things. And they don't want to invest in a stodgy old house because they consider that they're tied down. Because today, more than ever, they have an opportunity to be able to work from wherever we want. I mean, there was the biggest influx of population was into Florida, into Texas, into Idaho, right? And all of these because people could work remotely. So there are all these factors that are coming into this whole situation that has happened. So today, there are more landlords than ever before. Why? Because people need housing, and because the next guy will pay more than you will. So of course, the landlord is going to try to find the highest rent that is humanly possible. Now, another factor that exists today that did not exist, say even 3-4 years ago. Can you get me, man, can you grab me a water from over there, Joe, please? Thank you. So that did not exist just 3 or 4 years ago, has been the amount of homes, about 2.2 million homes have been have been taken off the market, and they've gone towards Airbnbs. Now, have we built 2.5 million homes in the last 3 or 4 years? Clearly, as a country, we have not built that many homes. So there is a huge shortage, and people that are coming of age, meaning they're moving out of their parents' homes, they need housing somewhere to live. So this is an important factor, which some of this is obviously meant to do good, but sometimes it has a bad reaction on the other end of it. Now, obviously, if you are on the left of things, left-leaning, you're going to say, oh my God, this is great. If you're on the right side, it's, oh my God, we're becoming basically, Hitler's Germany. I mean, it's kind of, they're trying to take over. I mean, that's the language that's used on both the extremes. It's two extremes, right? People saying that, well, no more rent, we should cancel all rents. nonsense stuff that just doesn't make any sense, because the society in America as we know it is going to come to an end at that point if that's what happens. But that's obviously not practical. Everybody understands that. The next thing is that housing supply, shortage of housing supply. So if we look at what we're building in Florida, we're building it because there's a math behind it. I'm building it somewhere around for 360 for a duplex. When I rent both of the sides out, we're getting about $4,300 in rent on those properties. My payment on the property is somewhere around $2,400 after all expenses. I don't have money out of pocket. So every single month, that makes me about $1,500 to $2,500 every single month, depending on if I'm doing a midterm rental, or if I'm doing a long-term rental, or if I'm doing a short-term rental. So then why would I ever want to do a regular rental on a property if there's no incentive for me to make any money? Why am I going to own real estate? Right? Especially in large quantities. That doesn't make sense. Now, I will buy real estate because everybody else is going bankrupt because they don't have the ability to be able to hold property for the long run, because they're eating from that income, meaning their livelihood or their retirement depends on the income that comes from rental properties. And if that's the case, then guess what happens? If you have something like federal rent control and somebody else outside is dictating to you what you can charge, and yet all your incremental costs start going up, at some point, you're going to get close to being close to your basically break-even point. And at some point, your break-even point is going to be basically more than rent that you can charge. At that point, there's no incentive for me to keep a house. Makes no sense. I'll just sell the property. So this is something to think about. Market forces are no longer at work, obviously, in this situation. And then what people who say basically are against it say, hey, property prices may decrease, right? Because you're going to put a lot more properties on the market. So regular homeowners who have nothing to do with owning a lot of rentals or who have nothing to do with owning a single rental, right? 85% of the American population is going to get hurt under that circumstance. So there's a host of things. I don't know exactly what is right. I don't know exactly what is wrong, or maybe somewhere a hybrid approach is the right approach. But yet, understand, he who has the most land, good economy or bad, always wins. What does that mean? What that means is that person who control the most amount of real estate, regardless of good economy or bad, as long as you've bought with the right numbers, you're going to come out on top. The people who are going to get hurt the most with any of this kind of stuff are the people who are the closest to basically being in trouble tomorrow if something goes wrong in their life. Because certainly they're going to live in buildings that are much worse than today, when the landlord has an incentive to keep up their building, and that is simple profit. So we're going to have a couple of people that are intimately familiar with this subject come and talk about it. This is something that is important, and from my end and for all of us as a group. Because even if I took the initiative to basically have a voice out there, without all of us as a group, right, we have no voice. Nobody's going to listen to us. And more than money, votes talk. So now, obviously in Illinois, this point of view, especially around Chicagoland, I should say, is not very favorable, because there are going to be a lot of tenant groups that are going to be like, oh my God, Andrew, look at you. You're making all this money from, collecting rent. I am. Right? I'm proud to be. I'm trying to go from $100,000 a month, $100-some thousand a month in cash flow to $250,000 net cash flow every single month. That's what I'm working on. That's the next stage of growth. So, but if somebody can put up a factory and they can make obscene amount of profit, if I'm providing housing, why should I not make a profit? Right? And who are you to dictate to me how much profit I should be making or should not be making? If I'm not doing anything dishonest, if I'm providing good quality housing and I'm providing it in good quality safe areas, and we have wonderful tenants that stay with us 7, 8, 9, 10 years, it's great. So artificially for forces outside to come and tell me that, hey, you cannot charge what the fair market rent would demand, that to me is very un-American. But that's just my point of view. If you know of any guests that we could have on that intelligently could debate and talk about this particular point, I would love to have them on, because I would like to further educate myself better on this particular subject. I know all the talking points. I understand intellectually that It should not be market forces to control it, not politics should not control it. But what I don't know is the economics behind it. Clearly, if I'm a landlord and if I'm not collecting enough rent to be able to take care of my property, why am I not just going to let it go? Because what's the incentive? If you take the incentive away from human beings to do something, you're going to have a lack of and a scarcity of. This is an important subject. I wanted to bring it up because this is an ongoing debate. And with the Republicans and the Democrats, how close the numbers are, this is not going anywhere, at least not right now. But there are murmurings of this that have already started happening. Someone like AOC, Elizabeth Warren, and some other senators that are going to be, I would consider, on the far left side, they're certainly pushing this agenda, and this has been in the works. So hopefully some of these thoughts made some sense to you today. This is an important topic, especially for us as landlords. We don't want to take the time away from our busy schedules, and I am 100% guilty of this fact also, that I've ignored this for years, but this is something that is really important. We all need to band together to have our voices heard, because then the only people that will end up benefiting from something like this are people only on the lower end of the spectrum, and then they're going to get disenfranchised because nobody is going to make housing available in the most poorest parts of town, right? Midtown Manhattan, you're not going to have certain rents. That's just how it is, right? So those are just a few of my thoughts. Having said that, if you are watching this on Burr Cash Flow Investors Group, fantastic. If you're not, then become a member. It's free, obviously, to join the Facebook group. But we encourage you to bring your friends, bring your family, invite a bunch of people, because for every single invite, you win a chance to win a cruise for two. So we're sponsoring a cruise for two for this time's giveaway to be able to help us grow the group. And it's all about, can we educate, can we talk about what is relevant to all of us, and hopefully be better investors because of that. That's the whole purpose of the group. So make sure you join if you're not a member, and then bring your friends, refer your family, because for every person that you refer to be a member of the group, you will have a higher statistical odds of winning, basically, because if you invite 3 people, we'll put 3 extra tickets. If you invite 4 people, we'll put 4 extra tickets under your name for the draw. So that's kind of where we are. Again, I want to remind everybody, Larry Brzezinski from Finance America was the sponsor for today's live, and the 3-day event is coming up. It's literally less than 27 days away. So make sure that you register. The link is right on the video that you're watching. It's andrewholmesevents.com. That's andrewholmesevents.com. And this time, 99.9% focus is going to be on 2 things. One is midterm rentals, because they're so darn lucrative right now, and on short-term Airbnbs, because they're so damn lucrative. And you'll see that shift, that Chicago market is shifting. And if you're not in the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to you're going to miss this wave of where on an average Airbnb or a midterm rental, the profit margins are close to $2,000 to $4,000, depending on what property you have, on bread and butter properties. So this is really important. This is number 26. And the event where the biggest successes come out of is always, always, always the winter event, which is the February event, because you're going to be ahead. You're going to have the current knowledge. You're going to have the current education to be able to get your investing started before everybody jumps in. Most investors jump into the game in April and May, when it's the worst time to buy properties. So I'm super thrilled. Look forward to seeing you at the 3-day event. Again, you register at andrewholmesevents.com. If you're bringing a spouse, you're bringing a guest, all you have to do is just let us know when you register, and you're welcome to bring them as our guest, and it does not cost them anything. If you're planning on attending, it's about $99 or $100. That's it. That's the only cost of it. Having said that, thanks a bunch and have a good day.